So let's now extend the debate to the UK. UK Committee on Research Integrity has a clear vision of the research system. How do they manage to accomplish it? Mr. President, this is going to be the topic of the speakers you're going to introduce.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Andrew George, who is the co-chair of the UK Committee on Research Integrity. It's really important that after Brexit, European countries remain together with the UK. And I know that at the Federation of European Academies of Medicine, the UK Academy of Medical Sciences plays a major role, and I encourage that deeply. Andrew George is an immunologist who has worked on cancer immunotherapy and transplantation and held senior leadership roles in universities. He has worked with the NHS, National Health Service, in research ethics, having chaired the National Ethics Advisors Panel and the advisory group that developed the NHS Research Transparency Strategy. He is also on the board of Health Education England, as well as NHS trusts, education establishments and charities. He is also an executive coach, supporting and teaching development of leaders in education, healthcare and business. The UK Committee on Research Integrity was established in 2022 to provide oversight for research integrity in the UK. Professor Andrew George was appointed together with Professor Rachel Hill as co-chairs of this body. Andrew George is Emeritus Professor at Imperial College London and Brunel University London. He was awarded an MBE for his contribution to research ethics.
Monsieur Président, and first of all, apologies that I am having to speak in English. I am a product of the English education system, which meant I spent probably 8 years learning French, which means I am immunized against learning it. I can learn other languages. That is a problem. And I would also like to reflect what you said about Britain remaining part of the European research and science enterprise, medicine enterprise. That is absolutely vital, not only for us, but also for the people whom we serve. We have to work together to get the best for the people that we serve. And thank you also for the two speakers that we have already heard today. We are all on the same path, we all have the same goal, but we are all in different places on the path. Some of us are ahead in places, some of us are behind in places. And so in actual fact, learning from each other is really, really important, and I have enjoyed that very much. So as Monsieur le Président said, I am the co-chair of the UK Committee on Research Integrity. This was set up only this year. And so we are very early, but we are obviously building on things that have already gone on in the United Kingdom. And so in my talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about what research integrity is from our viewpoint. I'm going to talk about the UK Committee on Research Integrity and how it is working and what it is planning to do. And then towards the end, I want to take perhaps a step backwards and look at research integrity from a framework that we don't normally look at it on, which is a virtue-based framework, which I would personally argue complements many of the more guideline and rule-based approaches that we use in the research integrity landscape. So what is research integrity? Well, we heard some very good definitions in the first talk. This is my working definition at the moment, that research integrity is what makes research trustworthy, ethical and responsible. Underpinning good research that people can have confidence in, and those people may be fellow researchers, they may be the public, it might be people who use the research. One of the committee had a much simpler definition, and she said research integrity is what makes research good. And I think that maybe that simplicity has a lot to argue for it. In the UK, research integrity has been frameworked for many years by the Concordat to support research integrity, which is a Concordat that is got a large number of signatories. Most of the signatories are involved in universities and funders that support research in universities. Though increasingly the Concordat is applying to research that happens outside universities, particularly the government, and perhaps increasingly in industry. And that concordat recognises 5 principles of research integrity that are necessary to deliver that objective that I outlined. And those are honesty. The research that we do, we as researchers have to be honest in the way that we do research. Rigour, so we have to use the best methodology available that's appropriate to the discipline and the question being asked, so we've got to be rigorous in our approach. We've got to be transparent and open in the way in which we communicate our research and our research findings. We have to have care and respect for the people and the subjects of research, whether those are people or whether those are animals or indeed the environment that we do research on. I also would argue we have to have care and respect for those others who are involved in the research process, including fellow researchers, students, and so on. And we have to have accountability. We have to know what we are accountable for, we have to know what other people are accountable for. And personally, I think that this is an area where we, as a research integrity community, have to do maybe a little bit more work. It's also really easy in research integrity to end up pointing at other people as to where that responsibility comes. So responsibility, as we already heard this morning, is a shared responsibility of the whole sector. Researchers have a responsibility. We as researchers have a responsibility for the integrity of our research, and actually also to some extent to the integrity of the research of the people we work with, our fellows, our students that we train. Research institutions have a very clear responsibility for research integrity, not only in terms that we've been hearing about so far, in terms of setting up panels and judging on issues where things have gone wrong, but also in setting up an environment by which good research can be done. Too often, researchers want to do good research, but there are perverse drivers, perverse motivators that are actually what gets people off track. Funders, again, have clear responsibilities. How do we fund research in a way that actually promotes integrity? Publishers, we've heard about the work of the Committee on Publication Ethics, regulators, and also indeed places like here, professional and learned societies have a clear responsibility for the research that's going on and understanding actually what research integrity means in different disciplines, in different areas. I think that we in the UK have, back 2 years ago, completed the landscape study, which looked at research integrity, interviewed a lot of researchers across the field. And this is a result which I can take both ways. I can either take as a glass half full or a glass half empty, depending on whether I'm feeling optimistic or pessimistic on the day. I could either be saying that 80% of researchers strongly believe that their personal integrity drives their research integrity. That's the good news. Or I could be glass half empty and say nearly 20% of researchers don't think that. Equally, nearly 3/4 of researchers report that researchers uphold high levels of research integrity all or almost most of the time. That could be the half glass, half full. Or I could be glass half empty with you and be pessimistic and say that more than 1/4 of researchers say that that researchers do not uphold those standards all the time. But I do think the thing that comes out of that, and it's going to touch back to what I'm going to talk about towards the end of the talk, is that researchers are overwhelmingly driven to achieve high levels of research integrity. They are driven by their intrinsic motivations for personal integrity and curiosity. Nobody, well, very few people, Wakefield, people like that may be an example, but very few people enter research wanting to do a bad job. Very few people want to cheat. Very few people want to falsify their results. And so we need to tap into that motivation in order to get good results, because we need to understand what frustrates people, what derails people, what makes people take shortcuts and do things wrong. And so in 2022, the UK Committee on Research Integrity was founded. It was founded on recommendations of our Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons, the Science and Technology Select Committee. given the last 3 months of UK politics, which I'm sure that you may have had a little bit of knowledge about, you may wonder how Parliament can set up something about research integrity. But let's be glad that it's happened, and let's take what's happened. Rather interestingly, we've actually set it up in a different way, and I was appointed chair of this together as a co-chair with Professor Rachel Guberman-Hill. She's actually a social anthropologist, I'm a biomedical scientist, as you heard, I'm an immunologist, and so we come with very complementary backgrounds. And actually for me, this is a really interesting model of co-working. I've never worked like this before, sharing a chair with somebody who we agree on what we are trying to achieve, but we come from very different backgrounds. We actually have very different epistemologies and ontologies. We have different understandings of knowledge and different understandings of how to get there. And this is actually really interesting and exciting for me to be part of. This is the committee members. I won't go through them all, but just to say that we have a breadth of people. We have an early career researcher, we have people from arts and humanities, we have people from physics. Most of them are from universities, but not all. We have one government statistician, and we also have one person who works very closely with industry, and we're seeking to expand that. We have researchers, but we also have people who are involved in managing the research integrity process. And our remit is to promote research integrity, to maintain and support high integrity in all research, to adopt and support good governance of research conduct, providing strategic advice, and also, I think importantly, to identify how systemic pressures affect research integrity and actually build opportunities to develop and improve on that one. Find the blockers to research integrity and unblock them. And as a committee, we are working with the research system. At the moment, most because of our background and because of where the interest is in the United Kingdom, a lot of our work is concentrating on higher education. But increasingly, we are involved in other public, private and third sector research. So we are talking to the museums, where a lot of research is done in museums. We're talking to other government departments that are carrying out research. And we are beginning, though these are early days, to talk with industry so that we have a united way forward. We are working collaboratively with existing bodies, and our role is to convene rather than duplicate. We are working at a more strategic joining up level. And while we are funded by the UKRI, now UKRI is the main source by which the government funds research in universities and research institutes, and we are funded by them. We set our own agenda, we're hosted by them, but we are seen as independent and we do not report to their board, so we have an independence of action in spite of being funded by them. But we have very firmly, and this is interesting hearing from the other committees, national committees, we are not an appeal or an investigative body. We are not the place where final appeals go to when the system is completed at the institution. And we do not have that approach in the United Kingdom at the moment. One of our early tasks is actually to investigate how do we actually deal with issues of misconduct. And therefore we are going to be advising on how we do that one. And I am still wrestling with the concept of whether an appeal body, a national appeal body, is the right way forward, or whether there are some other ways forward. And as has happened in France and has happened here, there are a lot of pressures from institutions, from other bodies and so on, which we have to manage. But I think that I should also say that we think that research misconduct, we saw that lovely spectrum, not lovely, but we saw that spectrum from research misconduct through to questionable practices, through to poor research product practice, that actually we want to concentrate a lot on the middle of that spectrum. We want to get research good. And we believe that while research misconduct is really important, and in some cases, for example, I think the Wakefield episode is one of the best examples of that, has devastating implications for people, actually making research good all the way through the spectrum is the greater goal that we should be aiming at. We operate in the United Kingdom in a very complex landscape. And many of these players have been here for many times, and these are only some of the people who are involved in the research integrity. UK RIO, anyone who has dealt with research integrity in the United Kingdom will have come across UK RIO. They are an incredibly good body that provide expert advisory service, they provide guidance and training. They are a charity and they have subscribers, and so some universities belong to them and some do not. They do not have, they provide excellent training and excellent advice, but they are not a regulatory body in that sense. We have the signatories group, which are the custodians of the Research Integrity Concordat, and we'll be working closely with them. We have some grassroots organisations, and perhaps the biggest one is the UK Research Reproducibility Network. Now, this is a very interesting organisation of organisations that have sprung up. This is an organisation that is very led by early career researchers, young researchers. Not totally, but a lot of their leadership is young researchers, originally coming out of the psychology world, concerned about the reproducibility issues in psychology, and working to find ways in a very bottom-up approach to improving the reproducibility. And they've spread to many universities, and they are spreading beyond psychology to other disciplines as well. And these are bodies that we are keen to work closely with because they represent the bottom-up as well as the top-down. We have international bodies, and COPE we have already heard of, and of course we have the other players, and I won't go through them because I've already touched upon them in that earlier diagram of research institutions, research funders, and indeed ourselves as the UK Committee on Research Integrity. We are going to be producing an annual report on research integrity, and while reports are not always exciting, actually for us this is going to be a key document, because it's going to be a document around the state of research integrity in the UK, but we will be looking outside the UK in order to benchmark good practice and good behaviour and good results otherwise. It's going to be defining the scope of research integrity, because again, one of the issues I think is really important is to understand what are the boundaries of research integrity and what are the boundaries of other good things that we should be doing in science. So for example, to give you just one example, some people are arguing that the sustainability, the environmental sustainability of research is something to do with research integrity. Personally, I would argue that the sustainability of science in terms of the green agenda is an incredibly important agenda, and an agenda that I greatly believe in, but is not actually a research integrity agenda, though it may overlap. And we have been charged very much in providing evidence that we can use to support the state of research integrity in our research enterprise, and that's going to include identifying gaps. And so I'm very interested in hearing how people in other places have measured or assessed the integrity of research in their area. We like to say research is high integrity in our countries, in our research establishments. The evidence for it, we need to develop. We have a number of information sources already, and so one of the things that we have is that all UK universities have to produce narrative statements on research integrity on an annual basis within their institutions, which includes a summary of any misconduct in other studies that have happened. But we will be drawing a lot on international data, international recommendations, international reviews, because many countries are further ahead of us, but also research is an international enterprise. But we'll also be looking at UK studies. So in the final few moments, I just want to also turn to a slightly different model of thinking about research. And I want us just to consider ourselves as researchers as a profession. I think most of us who are researchers would think of research as a form of profession. And yet we possibly don't always think enough about what does it mean to be a professional researcher. We know what it means in this room to be a professional doctor, and that is, we probably have a good understanding of that. But what do we mean to be a professional researcher? And there are several aspects of profession, there are several ways of understanding professions. One is a taxonomic approach, which is perhaps a classical approach, where a profession is someone who has knowledge and expertise, A professional is somebody who has independent judgment and autonomy. And a profession is somebody who has ethical standards. I mean, probably, this gentleman here in the medical world has actually set up the code of conduct or the code of ethics, which underlines a lot of medicine, though I would argue that most medics haven't read his own recently if they still subscribe to it. But this concept of setting up a code or a standard of ethics that you then follow. And this, I think, is a very important approach. But it's an approach that has limitations. It's an approach that can often be self-seeking. It's an approach that can be inward-looking. The other approach is a more sociological view of a profession, which is that the profession is around accumulating power and authority to the professional body. And that can be for two reasons. It can be to the benefit of the professional, because you basically are setting up a monopoly. Let's speak about medicine. Doctors have a monopoly and that protects them. Or it can be about protecting the client. Doctors have a monopoly of who can be a doctor, and that means only good doctors can be doctors, and that protects the patient. And depending upon your politics, you can play that either way. I'm interested in looking at the work more coming out of the Aristotelian models of ethics, which is a virtue ethics, where you define the practice, you define the ultimate end, the ultimate purpose of a practice, the telos of a practice, and you think about the virtues that are needed. So what is the ultimate telos of research? What is the purpose of research? Whatever it is, it should embrace all research. You should unite two goods. When we talk about good research, we talk about ethical research, how to do good research. We also talk about good research as the outcome. That was a good paper because it had some interesting results and it was well conducted. How do we combine those two goods into a single good? And so when I talk about good research, I know that it is research that is both practically good, but also morally good. And I would also argue it's something that needs to be constructed by the community. But, constructing it in myself, but starting off the debate, I would argue that we need to connect through to a telos of research. It would be something like that research enables humans and society to flourish by increasing our understanding and knowledge. And that we need to keep that telos in front of us, because that is the telos that actually inspires people. That is the telos of why we went into research. That is why our PhD students, our master's students, want to do research. And what we've got to do is hold that in front of them and hold that in front of us, and not bash it out of them by the system that we make them operate in. And we need to then think, in my last 2 minutes, of what are the virtues of research? What are the character that you need in order to be a good researcher? And there are various ways of looking at it. You can look at the cardinal virtues that Aristotle and Plato and people like that derived of courage. How can you be courageous? How do we teach our researchers to be courageous? How do we teach them to moderate their courage and use courage in the right way? Temperance. The Wakefield example, I think, is an example of a lack of temperance, a lack of self-control that he had in what he was doing. Justice, understanding justice, both in terms of distributed justice, how do we give the right things to the right people, but also justice in giving people what they deserve, what they own, and that includes fellow researchers, students, and so on. And practical wisdom, which is perhaps the key virtue, because it is that wisdom that enables you to balance things out, and balance out your skills and know when to do something. Often we do things because we can do them, but should we do them? And you, all those in this room who are doctors, will know that very well. But there are also modern virtues you can tie on to that. Virtues of curiosity. Actually, how can you be a good scientist without being curious? Love of learning. Teamwork, something Aristotle probably wouldn't have noticed, and one that certainly Aristotle would not have seen humility. He would not have seen that as a one. But actually, we need to be, as researchers, humble, both to each other, but also in the face of the truth that we are trying to discover. So I would argue that virtues, that some work on this, and it's a project I want to be leading over the next couple of years, sponsored by, but perhaps more personally, provides an explicit understanding and complements the other understanding, complements the work that this gentleman did as well, about research as a profession, and that we need to develop a telos of research that can provide a north star for the research community. We need to develop the understanding of the virtues needed and have a discussion around that one. And we need to engage in that motivation that draws most people into research. So my time has come to an end, so I'll just get back to conclusions and just summarise. I think we're at a really critical moment for developing best practice in research. We're seeing, in this meeting today, we're seeing that so many pieces are moving and coming together slightly differently in different places in our worldwide community, but they're coming together. And this is a moment where there is generalised agreement that this is something we've got to get right and something we've got to build on. Hopefully I've outlined to you how the UK Committee on Research Integrity has started to work and plans to operate and plans to work with other bodies in other countries to do it. And hopefully I've given you a little thought, a little different lens that we might be able to look at research integrity going forward. So I'll stop there, but just leave, if anyone is interested in understanding more about what we're doing in the UK Committee on Research Integrity, we are producing now newsletters which will be growing our communications over time. Please feel free to email this address and be put on our community of interest. And if you're really lucky and you put on our community of interest, we may even ask you your opinion from time to time to help us develop what we're trying to do. So merci, thank you, and apologies that I'm speaking in English.
Thank you so much for this British touch to our meeting. So we are still a little bit behind our schedule, but still I would love to have a few questions from our last speaker, if possible in English. Yes.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I would want to ask you the questions of legal aspects. You mentioned the Aristotelian and the different templates of research integrity. But depending on the countries, research integrity is being considered as part of the legal organization. And Professor Koval has mentioned the law on research integrity developed by the French organization. Unfortunately, in Belgium, this is just based on goodwill. There is no real decree, there was no discussion of the House of the Communes, of the Senate or the Deputy Chambers. So there is not even a legal aspect on the different commissions in Flanders and in Wallonia and Brussels. So what is exactly the status in UK, the legal aspects of the funding of your organization, and are there any judicialization that is being contemplated?
Thank you for that question. So first of all, we as a body are set up on the recommendation of the government. That we have a much more unwritten constitution than other people, so we're not founded in that sort of sense. The government said it would be a good idea to found us, so we were founded, so we exist. And that gives us a certain legitimacy, because we can point to why we were funded, but there isn't a statute that is written down that says that we have to be founded, because that's not how our legal system works so much. I think it's a very interesting question as to how much should be legally funded. Of course, everything that we do in research is under the umbrella of the law, and if you break the law, you break the law, and there's many aspects of law, many aspects of law that we have to take into account. I personally would argue that I would prefer to keep as much of this out of the legal system as possible, simply because the legal system and Parliament, our government, are perhaps not best able to do the nuances of what it does and what it means, and also are going to be relatively slow. Those are slow processes. We, as a research community, should be working together and having robust laws that within ourselves, robust guidelines within ourselves. And that means, though, that some funders, like for example UKRI, the main government funder, has immense influence, to put it mildly. If UKRI, the Wellcome Trust, and 2 or 3 of the main funders are brought together and agree, helped by us as a committee, that these are certain things that they are going to acquire, then they are going to have, frankly, far more impact on researchers than somebody producing a legal law, because researchers need research funding, and they will follow that. Same with publications, same with everyone else. So I guess I'm keen that we produce regulations and guidelines so that those come from within the community wherever possible. And I think, I would say, and I don't think this is a danger in the UK at the moment, but I would say if we can't get our own house in order, and if we as a research community can't do that one, then in the future there may well be a danger that that gets taken away from us. And if it gets taken away from us, then I think that would be bad, personally. Others may disagree with me, but I think that would be bad news.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Vous avez des questions?
Non, pas de questions. Aujourd'hui, c'est très tranquille sur Internet. Je vois que tout le monde écoute. Thank you so much for